64 CE, a woman, naked, bleeding, and trembling, staggers down the cobbled streets of Rome. Her skin glistens with filth and blood as the crowd jeers, hurling rotten food, stones, and insults. Chains bite into her wrists. She can barely stand. But the mob's appetite for cruelty isn't satisfied yet. She's being led somewhere, a place where even death will be slow, theatrical, and horrifying. The Colosseum awaits her. But here's what most people don't realize. This wasn't an isolated act of brutality. This was a show, a meticulously designed public ritual meant to both entertain and terrorize an entire civilization. Ancient Rome, the empire that built aqueducts, invented legal systems, and shaped modern governance, was also the stage for humanity's darkest performance. Beneath the marble columns and Latin poetry, Rome perfected a new kind of punishment, the fusion of execution, theater, and sexual humiliation. You see, to the Romans, death alone wasn't enough. A criminal's suffering had to be spectacular. It had to teach a lesson that burned itself into the public mind. This wasn't mere violence. It was messaging, political propaganda, disguised as entertainment. And the stars of these shows weren't gladiators, they were women. Women accused of crimes ranging from adultery to rebellion to simply refusing a powerful man. Rome turned their punishment into a ritual of destruction, a spectacle designed to annihilate not just your bodies, but their dignity. Imagine it. You're standing in the Forum, the heart of the empire. The air stinks of sweat, garbage, and anticipation. You can hear the roar of the crowd before you even see her. Chains rattle. Then she appears, dragged through the marketplace naked and bleeding. Every stop along her route is chosen deliberately, past the temple where she once prayed, past the home where her family still lives. She's forced to confront every piece of her past as the crowd mocks her. This wasn't random cruelty, it was systematic humiliation. The Romans believed that destroying a person's spirit in public was a more powerful warning than execution itself. Roman parents brought their children to watch these parades. They called it education. Imagine that, teaching kids morality through degradation. And if a family refused to join the ritual, they risked being labeled traitors themselves. Some parents even threw stones at their own daughters just to prove their loyalty. The guards, specially trained in psychological torment, knew exactly how to make this suffering last. They'd pause the procession at strategic points, force the condemned to walk upright, and if a woman tried to cover herself, they'd break her fingers. Every move, every scream was calculated, and yet this wasn't the main event. This was the prelude. The parade through Rome was just Act 1. What awaited inside the arena was a descent into madness. Because once those colossal gates closed, there was no pretense left. No law, no mercy, only entertainment. 50,000 Romans packed into stone seats, cheering as a naked woman was dragged into the sand. But this wasn't a quick death. It wasn't even about killing her. It was about breaking her. Roman writers like Martial and Cassius Dio describe how women were forced to reenact mythological scenes. Europa's rape by Zeus, Leda and the swan, Pasiphae and the bull. But these weren't symbolic. The empire turned them into literal performances. Trained animals were brought in, bulls, horses, bears, conditioned through starvation and pain, unleashed in acts too horrific to imagine. The crowd didn't flinch. They applauded. And when the act ended, the people would cheer for an encore. The Roman word for this ritualized torment was supplicium, not just punishment, but the deliberate destruction of a person's humanity before death. Emperors sat in gilded boxes, sipping wine as if attending an opera. Senators laughed, poets wrote verses about the spectacle, and priests called it divine justice. It wasn't insanity, it was infrastructure. Rome had built an entire political system on the foundation of public humiliation. They knew that if people feared degradation more than death, rebellion would die before it began. And perhaps most chilling of all, the victims weren't always criminals. Some were symbols, messages, warnings. Because in Rome, power didn't need to justify cruelty. Cruelty was a justification for power. But if you think that was the limit of Rome's depravity, think again. Because there were some women the Romans considered too sacred to simply execute. For them, the empire created something far worse. A punishment designed to outlast death itself. And what happened to them is almost too horrifying to believe.
They were called the Vestal Virgins, chosen as children, sworn to purity, and worshipped as the living symbols of Rome's eternal flame. The Vestals were untouchable until the empire decided they weren't. When a Vestal virgin was accused of breaking her vow of chastity, the Romans faced a dilemma. Killing her outright would anger the gods. Letting her live would undermine the empire's moral authority. So they invented a punishment that did both. They killed her. Slowly. The ritual began in front of the entire Senate. Imagine it. A vast hall lined with senators in white togas, the accused Vestal standing in the center, naked, trembling, eyes hollow from terror. The air thick with silence. The priests would read her crimes. Then they'd begin stripping away her garments, one by one, while senators debated her fate. It wasn't about justice. It was about humiliation elevated to sacred theater. The historian Pliny the Younger described these rituals in letters that were hidden for centuries. According to him, the Vestal was then beaten with rods until her skin split open, but never enough to kill her. That would defeat the purpose. She had to suffer consciously. Then came the final ritual, what Romans called the living tomb. Outside the city walls, they dug a narrow underground chamber. Inside, they placed a couch, a flickering lamp, and a few crumbs of bread and water, just enough to prolong the agony. The Vestal was led there blindfolded, her wrists bound, her body still bleeding. The priests performed sacred chants, pretending to absolve themselves of guilt, before sealing the entrance behind her. And then, silence. For days afterward, people could still hear her screams echoing through the ground. Families would visit the site and press their ears to the earth, whispering prayers or perhaps listening out of curiosity. Some even brought their children. They called it divine justice. Pliny wrote of one Vestal who survived for 18 days in the dark before her voice faded into nothing. 18 days. Imagine the terror of realizing no one would open that stone ceiling, of scratching your nails raw against jagged walls until your fingers bled, of feeling the lamp flicker out and the blackness closing in. Every part of the chamber was designed to torture the mind. The broken pottery embedded in the walls, the air stale, suffocating. The lamp's dying light casting long shadows that moved like ghosts. It wasn't just punishment, it was a message to every Roman woman. Purity wasn't protection, it was possession. And if the gods didn't intervene, Rome would. The Emperor Domitian personally oversaw the construction of these chambers. He ordered architects to perfect the acoustics so the screams could be heard from the streets above. He called it the voice of divine justice. But the truth? It was sadism, disguised as religion. Because to Rome, faith and fear were tools, and emperors learned how to wield both with surgical precision. And the terrifying part, Rome didn't stop there. Some emperors didn't just authorize these rituals, they joined them. They wanted to feel the power of life and death in their own hands. Caligula, for instance, didn't just attend executions, he directed them. He treated human suffering like a creative project, choreographing acts of violence with the precision of a theater director. He'd summon architects, trainers, and engineers to design new forms of torment. Foreign diplomats were forced to watch, their faces frozen as Rome displayed its dominance through horror. It wasn't entertainment, it was diplomatic terror. Archaeologists even found evidence that Caligula built private arenas beneath his palace to test new tortures on slaves before bringing them to the public stage. Then came Nero, the emperor whose madness became legend. He didn't just watch these spectacles, he became part of them. Dressed as a gladiator, he personally assaulted condemned women, turning state executions into his own theater of depravity. But here's what most people miss. This wasn't chaos. It was control. Rome institutionalized humiliation. They created official positions, titles, salaries, bureaucracies dedicated solely to devising new torments. The magistrate of public degradation was a real government office. Cruelty became a system. But something unexpected happened. As Christianity spread through the empire, Romans began to question the morality of what they'd once cheered for. Crowds thinned, the applause faded. By the 4th century, the arenas went quiet, not because of imperial mercy, but because Rome's people had finally lost their appetite for blood. But even as the flames of the Colosseum died out, the scars remained. Historians later discovered frescoes and mosaics inside private Roman villas depicting these scenes of execution. Families ate dinner beneath paintings of women being tortured to death. To them, it was decoration. To us, it's a mirror. Because the question Rome forces us to ask isn't just, how could they? It's, are we really so different? In the next section, we'll go deeper into how this system of public humiliation didn't die with Rome. It evolved into something far more modern, far more familiar, and far more dangerous than anyone wants to admit.
Here's the truth most history books avoid. Rome didn't vanish. The empire may have crumbled, but its mindset, the idea that humiliation and spectacle could control society, never disappeared. It simply changed form. You see, the Romans weren't just engineers of roads and aqueducts. They were architects of fear. They understood something profound about human nature. People are easier to govern when they're afraid of shame more than pain. That's why public torture wasn't just entertainment, it was infrastructure. Every scream, every execution, every drop of blood that fell on the Colosseum sand served a political purpose. It was a performance of dominance, a demonstration of who owned the right to inflict suffering and who didn't. And here's the part that's hardest to face. The world learned from them. After Rome's fall, the blueprint of control through humiliation spread across civilizations like an infection. Medieval Europe perfected it in its own way. Public executions were no longer about divine justice, they became moral theater. Think about it. The gallows in a town square, the crowd chanting as someone's body swung in the air. The message was always the same: don't step out of line. Even the tools changed with time. The cross became the stake, the arena became the scaffold, but the intention was identical. Inquisition courts learned to use shame as a weapon sharper than any sword. They didn't just kill heretics, they paraded them, shaved their heads, stripped their clothes, and branded their flesh with symbols of guilt. It wasn't about faith, it was about spectacle. Rome's genius had infected the church. And centuries later, when kings and empires began broadcasting power to the masses, they rediscovered Rome's favorite instrument: the audience. Because without an audience, humiliation loses its power. In ancient Rome, the crowd was both witness and accomplice. By watching, they became part of the punishment. By cheering, they became complicit in cruelty.
And that's what made the system unbreakable, until one day, the audience itself changed. By the late Empire, some Romans began to whisper that these spectacles were curses upon their souls. Christian philosophers wrote of moral blindness, of citizens numbed by the normalization of horror. It took 3 centuries for those whispers to silence the Colosseum. But silence didn't mean healing. It meant transformation. Because the same hunger for spectacle found new stages: palaces, courthouses, marketplaces, and eventually screens. Yes, we no longer fill arenas to watch people die, but we still gather in digital colosseums to witness humiliation. Public shaming has gone global. The Romans dragged bodies through the streets. We drag reputations across the internet. Different tools, same psychology. The goal is still control through spectacle. Destroy the individual publicly enough and the crowd learns the lesson. Fall in line or face annihilation. The Roman emperors would have loved Twitter. Imagine Caligula with a platform where millions could watch, react, and amplify his cruelty in real time. Or Nero live streaming his own performances, the crowd spamming hearts and laughter emojis as the empire burned behind them. It sounds absurd until you realize we already do it. We celebrate downfall. We consume humiliation as entertainment. Viral videos of public breakdowns ruin careers, destroy reputations. It's not lions and bulls anymore, it's algorithms and hashtags. The crowd hasn't changed. The stage just got bigger. And here's where it gets darker. Just like Rome, modern societies justify it. We call it justice, accountability, or free speech. The Romans said the same. But peel away the words and you'll see the same ancient desire to watch, to judge, to feel morally superior while someone else's life disintegrates in front of us. Rome built monuments of marble to immortalize their power. We build digital monuments of shame that never disappear. And while Rome's victims were erased from history, ours are preserved forever in pixels. That's the ultimate irony. Our cruelty has become eternal. The Romans could only destroy a body. We can destroy a memory. And that's why Rome's legacy isn't buried under ruins. It's alive in our technology, our media, and our instincts. The same fear that kept slaves obedient and citizens silent still hums beneath the surface of our civilized world. So the real question isn't how Rome fell. It's how much of Rome still lives inside us. Because what the empire taught the world wasn't just how to conquer land, it taught us how to conquer each other. Through shame, through spectacle, through the illusion that cruelty can ever be justified when it wears the mask of civilization. And that brings us to the final, most disturbing truth. Rome's cruelty didn't just shape history, it shaped the very definition of entertainment. The spectacle became our inheritance, and what started in the blood-soaked sand of the Colosseum evolved into something much larger than an empire. It became humanity's favorite story.
If you walk through the ruins of the Colosseum today, it's eerily quiet. The sun burns through gaps in the stone arches, and the wind whistles through what used to be tunnels for cages, chains, and bodies. Tourists take selfies on the same ground where thousands screamed their last breath. They call it history, but it's not history. It's prophecy. Because the Colosseum wasn't built just for Rome. It was built for us. Every civilization that followed has resurrected it in its own way. On stages, on screens, on feeds. The structure may crumble, but the idea of the arena never dies. And the proof is everywhere. Reality television, humiliation-based comedy, revenge porn, cancel culture, modern descendants of ancient Rome's theater of cruelty. We don't hurl stones anymore, we hurl comments. We don't demand blood, we demand apologies. We don't feed people to lions, we feed them to the algorithm.
The rules are ancient, the packaging modern. The crowd still gathers, the judges still vote, and the condemned still walk through the virtual streets, shamed before millions. It's the same performance, only the costumes have changed. Because deep down, human beings haven't evolved past the Roman crowd's addiction to suffering. We've just made it convenient. Back then, the empire used public humiliation to maintain control. Today, we use it to feel control, to vent, to belong, to distract ourselves from our own fear of being next. Every retweet, every meme, every clip of someone's downfall, it's all part of the same ritual. A ritual that started when Rome first realized that destruction could be entertaining. And the most chilling part? The Romans eventually stopped. We haven't. They outgrew their taste for blood, but we've digitized ours, globalized it, turned it into a billion-dollar industry. Our modern coliseums are endless. YouTube comment sections, TikTok scandals, news cycles feeding on human misery. And when you really think about it, who are we in this story? We like to imagine we'd be the ones refusing to watch, turning away from cruelty, but statistically we wouldn't be. Most Romans didn't resist either. The same moral numbness that silenced them numbs us now too. We scroll past cruelty with a mix of fascination and disgust, exactly the balance Rome perfected 2,000 years ago. And maybe that's what makes the Roman Empire so haunting. Not the marble ruins or the faded frescoes, but the realization that everything they did, everything we condemn, still happens. Only now it's invisible, normalized, automated. Rome is gone, but the spectacle lives on. Every time we consume pain as entertainment, every time we justify cruelty in the name of justice, every time we forget the humanity of the person behind the story, Rome breathes again. That's the real legacy of the empire. Not the roads or the art or the law, but the idea that civilization and savagery can coexist in perfect harmony. The Romans convinced themselves they were enlightened, that their violence was righteous, their cruelty necessary. And so do we. We build our empires out of data, likes, and outrage. We worship technology instead of gods. But the stage, the audience, and the actors haven't changed. The Colosseum was never just a place, it was a mirror. And the reflection it shows us is eternal. Because the question isn't, how could they do it? It's, how could we still be doing it? Maybe the truth is that every civilization builds its own arena, and every generation, sooner or later, becomes the crowd. So the next time you scroll through a feed, laughing, judging, or watching someone's life fall apart for your entertainment, ask yourself one question. Are you watching the fall of Rome, or are you sitting in its stand?